The period of the 1980s through 1990s had some pivotal movements in its pop culture that deeply impacted American society. Influential bands and musicians such as The Cure, Boy George, David Bowie, Cyndi Lauper, and Madonna redefined what it meant to be on the edge and what it meant to be man or woman. Countercultural and individualistic fashion emerged, and the world embraced ideas of entrepreneurship and environmentalism. Additionally, with the new era of booming technology, society was just acquainting itself with the several new mediums of communication and entertainment that would change the world. When you reflect on the society that you live in, with its several fashion, musical, technological, and scientific ideals and icons constantly communicating to us who or what we need to be, how does that influence how you see yourself as an individual and as a man or woman? Mosby Cogswell, a woman born of the early 1980s, shares some of her experiences about how pop culture affected both her and her society's views of themselves.
I was born in 1980. I remember some things from the 80s. I have a sister who's 5 years older than me, so she would bring in a lot of pop culture stuff. You know, she was really into sort of British new wave, androgynous men. I remember she had a picture, a big poster of Robert Smith from The Cure. It was really sort of the early 90s that I came of age in terms of pop culture. Horrible things like Ice Ice Baby, I remember that. I remember a lot of hip hop that was coming out at that time, and a lot of it was very positive and a lot of it was very negative, so I remember a lot of those conversations happening. I tried to really ignore a lot of pop culture. I deliberately didn't engage in a lot of pop culture stuff, although when you disengage from that, you're still aware of it in order to disengage from it. So I was aware of the larger picture, but I was not particularly involved in it. Well, I remember Madonna. I remember Cyndi Lauper. There was this sort of image of radical woman. Madonna, in particular, sort of exuded this personality that she was in control of her sexuality. And essentially what you have is a still hypersexualization of a young woman, right? Even if she is supposedly taking control of her sexuality, everything has to do with her sexuality. She had very little personality beyond her sexuality. Madonna sort of got the attention by shocking. I remember the sex book, and she's hitchhiking and in this photo, and she's completely naked, and this was meant to be liberating. But I think that also at the same time it was confining. Right? It's liberating that as a woman you can take control of your sexuality, but the confines are still there, that as a woman you are still defined by your sexuality. There was still a hypermasculinity in there as well. It was this sort of tension between that. You still knew what it was to be a man, and you still knew what it was to be a woman, and those confines were still very much there, even though there were some people on the fringe and some people in the mainstream who were pushing those boundaries. I also think that there certainly was progress. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it was all negative either. People in their late 20s to mid 30s, let's say, who were sort of growing up in that era, I think were exposed to images that previous generations were not as readily exposed to. It doesn't mean that it was brand new. There was an increase in images of what it is to be on the fringe. So I remember Boy George, and we could talk about Robert Smith again. And then of course David Bowie is sort of the archetype. I think that there were these individuals who pushed the limits of gender and were recognized for that. I mean, I don't think it changed the world, but I do think that in those formative years it certainly made an impression on many of us. People who are in my age bracket some people might be a little bit more comfortable with those images because they were exposed to them. I think that the largest component that has changed is just the amount of messages that we're getting every day. We are inundated with pop culture now. When I was growing up, I didn't have a computer, we didn't have the internet. I mean, it certainly existed, but it wasn't in everybody's home at that point. There wasn't YouTube, there wasn't channel after channel after channel on the TV that showed you all of these different ways of being. It was limited, and now there's so many modes of getting information, and that's a little scary, I have to say. As an adult, it makes me a little worried because there's no filter. As far as the hypersexualization of women, I think that that's still out there. I think another interesting thing that's continued but gotten a little stronger is, I mentioned before, Madonna and Cyndi Lauper, and there was this sort of feeling like they were counterculture. Of course, they weren't counterculture essentially because they were adopted by the mainstream, but there was a sense that they were counterculture, at least for a limited amount of time. And so to enjoy their music, to dress like them, to talk like them, meant to the people, to the young women who were consuming those things, that they were on the fringe, that they were edgy and new and not mainstream, right? And we certainly have that today. I think Lady Gaga is one of the best examples of that. But there are many examples of these sort of like pseudo-edgy, feminist, counterculture icons, but when you look at them, they are not at all counterculture. They are heavily branded. They're completely adopted by the mainstream. And so it becomes ever more difficult to see what's counterculture, to see alternative ways of being, alternative ways of looking, because the mainstream so quickly snatches up all of those potentially counterculture icons because they can make money doing it. So there's this constant evolving of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man and what it means to be an American and who you need to be, and so that you're always having to then go out and purchase more. You're always having to reevaluate yourself and feeling inadequate and then buying more and then feeling satisfied for an amount of time and then looking and going, oh my goodness, I'm not this. And so it's this vicious cycle. That said, I do think that there are some constants that haven't changed quite yet. I think that sexualization of women is still very much there. There's been a slight change in diversity of images that we see in women. We certainly see more women of color, not percentage-wise, as compared to white women, is still just completely ridiculous. But as far as from the past, we see more images of women of color. We see more images of body type. It's still pretty dismal, but at least we're seeing somewhat of an increase. Why? Because again, we can market to those people. And I think that with men, there's also been an increase in focus on what men are supposed to be and what men are supposed to look like. So it used to be that men were sort of supposed to be buff and really sort of whatever that is to be masculine, and that's certainly there. But now there's this new side of it, which is metrosexual. It's still hyper-masculine in a way, but the definition of what masculine is has changed slightly, and I think that is also about consumerism. I wish that I could just say, turn off the TV, turn off the computer, but that's not an answer. I think that really the most important thing is to get young people to just think critically. If you become a critical thinker and if you really start being able to analyze what are these images, what are the messages behind them, what are they trying to tell me about what it is to be a woman or a man or human or American or whatever multiple identities that they're targeting, if you're able to do that, then what you choose to do with those understandings is up to you, and that's the hope. I would like to see more variety, I think, is the bottom line. It doesn't mean that the images that are out there don't have their place. Some do. But I think that we are exposed to such a small, confined amount of images and messages about what it is to be a human or what it is to be a man or a woman, what it is to be a heterosexual or homosexual, what it is to be white or a person of color. Those messages are so narrow and so confining, and I would love to see more options. I would love to see positive images and negative images of the whole spectrum. I would just love to see a better reflection of reality in the media versus this sort of consumerist-driven piece. As much as I love books and as much as I love sites that you go online and you can find online journals and things like that, as much as I love that, that's not where today's youth is getting their information, and they need to be well equipped for how to figure out what the information is and what those messages are. So we have to teach that. And I think that if we do, then we 10, 15, 20 years down the line, we might see some progress as these people become the CEOs of media companies, as they become social justice advocates, then maybe we can see those sorts of changes. I really do worry about the state of our environment, overpopulation in the world. I worry that we are not taking care of our Earth in a way that's sustainable, that in 50 years we can actually maintain our living standard. As far as sort of social issues go, my hope is that there continues to be work done for equality and social justice. Those things might end up taking a back seat as economic collapse happens, as environmental collapse happens. And I would hope that it doesn't. The tools, the media tools that I spoke about before that have been in many ways such a detriment and so confining in terms of defining our identities, I think can also be used for some pretty amazing positive change. I think that there is an ingenuity in today's young generation that, just the fact that when I sit with my students and I ask for solutions that, to problems that I struggle with finding solutions, the kids come up with some really wonderful things. I mean, this is such a cliche. And to quote Whitney Houston, I believe the children are our future. But I do believe that there is a lot of hope there. I think that there is a lot of legitimacy that's been given to social justice and to environmental justice, that young people today can actually make legitimate choices in how they treat the earth and treat each other, that can then become the mainstream rather than just some sort of phase of counterculture. So I do see hope in young people today, but it's really all about choices.